in the countries where the technology is much advanced with the scientific ways in order to have the high standard of life, they give priority to the IQ. And now they start to emphasize on the moral conduct. So it is very good to hear that. They are concentrating on the moral conduct from the young age. And there's one teacher who teaches in a school in Yangon to the students. The way he taught is very noteworthy. One needs to have the worldly education to a certain extent. And it doesn't say to which extent, but it only says that one should have the worldly education that is necessary. So just as Sikkha, the worldly education is necessary, in the same way, Vinayu cha Susekito, one also needs the good moral conduct. But some of the people, or most of the people, are giving priority to the IQ. And some of them do not pay attention on the EQ. There are times when the more important factor is written first, and less important factor comes later. And sometimes it happens that the certain kind of fact that is written later is more important. It is in some cases, the most important is mentioned first. What is more important is the moral conduct rather than the worldly education. So in Yangon, back in the 2007, in April, the teacher gave some advice to the students. At the time, the students all gathered in the same place. And the advice that the teacher gave is very noteworthy and it should be followed. The teacher said that most young people, they seek the worldly education and they are eager to seek the worldly education because nowadays it is the era where worldly education is compulsory. So young people, they seek the worldly education. And the person who has higher IQ gets a better result than the people with lower IQ. So the people, the students who have lower IQ feel inferior and upset. Actually, having high IQ is good, but EQ, the emotional quotient, is more important than the IQ, the intelligence quotient. So it means that for a person, the intelligence, not only the intelligence is important, but the emotional quotient is more important. So what he said is very true. The person should not only give priority to the studies or the education. What is more important is the moral conduct. So what the teacher taught is not from his idea, but he had this reference from a writer who is in the U.S. The writer is the name of the writer is Daniel Goleman. He is a well-known author. Daniel Goleman made a research, and he made a research that in order to be successful, not only the IQ is important, but what is more important is the EQ, the emotional quotient. So Daniel Goleman found out in a research in the Harvard University that the EQ, emotional quotient, is more important than the IQ. Daniel Goleman wrote this not only from the theory alone, but through what he observed from a research. He made a research and he found out that the 25% of the people who are successful because of their good IQ, whereas 75% of the people who are successful gain their success because of their high EQ. The research was done in 1,000 people, and from this research, he found out that EQ is more important than the IQ. Daniel explained the meaning of EQ, the emotional quotient, as one's moral conduct and the disposition of the person. But here Sayadaw will like to replace E with an S. So instead of EQ, Sayadaw like it as SQ, S standing for the 3 Sikkha, the 3 trainings, Sila, Samadhi and Panya, morality, concentration and wisdom that is practiced. So instead of EQ, it becomes SQ, Sikkha quotient, training quotient. And with the practice of Satipatthana, the meaning becomes very complete. Satipatthana quotient. And as the practice is a spiritual practice, one has to practice in order to have spiritual development. SQ can also be taken as spiritual quotient, or the Sikkha quotient, Satipatthana quotient. So according to Daniel, the ones who have high EQ, there are 6 qualities of a person who has high EQ. The first one is self-evaluation. And the second is one has a good control of one's impulses. And the third is one has good conduct. And the fourth is one has compassion, empathy, consideration towards others. And the fifth is one praises the good work of others, and the sixth is having intellectual knowledge that is truthful. So these are the 6 qualities that Daniel mentioned about the people with high EQ. The first factor, self-evaluation, is very important. One needs to understand who he is or who she is. So a person might just understand himself that he is a human, she is a human being. And it is important to understand oneself through the practice, what kind of moral conduct a person has, what kind of disposition a person has, what kind of moral conduct, what kind of disposition he or she has. So one will understand oneself, the differences comparing the past and now, if there are any improvements in himself or herself. In this way, one should have self-evaluation. If the person leaves one's physical, verbal, mental behavior to be free without any control, then the person gets tormented by the defilements, and the person gets burnt by the defilements. The mind becomes dirty, polluted, inferior. As the defilements, lobha, dosa, moha, arise in great momentum without any control, the person is overwhelmed by these defilements, so that the person is burnt, dirty, polluted with the defilements, and his or her mentality is very low, inferior, and degraded. The person's behavior becomes rude, gross. By practicing Satipatthana meditation, one understands oneself and one will have a good control. If there is no Satipatthana practice, one will not be able to control one's impulses. Coming across things of transgression, then there will be defilements arising. When there are things inciting the defilements enter the mind without any control. Practicing sila cannot have self-defense from the agitation or being shaken with the good and bad conditions. Having practiced sila alone, one will not have the maturity in order to withstand good and bad conditions. Having samadhi khanda, the concentration group, one will have the mental strength and will be able to withstand the good and bad conditions. By discerning knowledge, discerning distinctly between the nama rupa, then one cultivates knowledge stage by stage. By cultivating knowledge stage by stage, one gains maturity. When the mind is mature, there will not be quick response. The mind will not be brittle when coming across with undesirable things. If the mind does not have any maturity, there can be anger, hatred right away, and coming across desirable objects, greed arises, and one becomes so much attached that one cannot part with that object. The person who does not have the spiritual stamina will not have any defense or repelling force from the defilements. Practicing Satipatthana meditation, one gains the maturity of the mind. One's mind becomes mature through the practice of Satipatthana meditation. The example is given here. When the person has good health, having done good exercise, the person has good immunity, able to defend himself, herself from illnesses. In the same way, having attained knowledge, one will have spiritual resistance, able to repel and defend oneself from the defilements. So in this way, one will have a good control of the impulses. One will have good conduct. It is said that the emotional quotient is more important than the IQ, the intelligence quotient. So the emotional quotient is more important than one's study or the worldly education. In the practice, as much one practices, honestly, diligently, in order to develop the mind and the knowledge, one's physical, verbal, mental behavior will become pure and clean. Through the practice of sila, morality, one's physical behavior, verbal behavior will become pure and clean. Through the practice of samadhi, concentration, one's mind becomes pure. And by cultivating knowledge, one gains maturity of the mind. By practicing the three trainings, sila, samadhi, and panya, one gains the benefit. One becomes mature. And one will have good conduct by body, speech, and mind. So it is the benefit. One should have faith and confidence. One should understand the benefits. One should know the way how to practice so that one's physical, verbal, mental behavior will be pure, clean, gentle, cultured, and lovable. By fulfilling the three Sikkha, by fulfilling the three trainings, one will have good virtue and one will be uplifted. So the practice, sila, samadhi, and panya, keep the person uplifted so that the person is not morally degraded. By having a good control of oneself, one's physical, verbal, mental behavior will be pure, clean, blameless, and one will not be hurting others. By practicing Satipatthana meditation, when one realizes the Dhamma, one also wants others to realize the Dhamma as well. Having realized the Dhamma himself or herself, the person also wants others to practice the same way, wanting others to be well, happy. If others do not practice Satipatthana meditation, they will have suffering. Having realized the Dhamma himself or herself, the person also wants others to realize the Dhamma, so that they will also be free from suffering. Having practiced Satipatthana meditation, one removes the selfishness, so that there will be patience, forgiveness, willing to make sacrifices. So such kind of good qualities, having patience, forgiveness, willing to make sacrifices, arises as a result of Satipatthana practice. And one will have compassion, consideration, empathy towards others. If a person does not have consideration or empathy, then the person indulges in lobha, greed, hurting others. The person indulges in dosa and hurts others. By practicing Satipatthana meditation, one gains reasoning power. Before one does something, before one talks something for one's benefit or other people's benefit, one will consider whether it is beneficial or not, and whether it is suitable or not. So it is very good for oneself as well as others. Without the Satipatthana practice, the love a person has towards others is just very superficial, and it is just the kind of love that is pretending, not deep but superficial. After practice of Satipatthana meditation, one will have deeper metta, loving kindness towards others. One will have deeper compassion towards others. One will have more patience, forgiveness, willing to make sacrifices. So in this way, good mental states arise after Satipatthana practice. So one will have more patience, more compassion, empathy, consideration towards others, so that when dealing with others, there will not be problem. So it is very important. If the majority of the people who have metta, loving kindness, compassion, consideration, empathy towards others, then it will be very pleasant. And the fifth quality is being able to appreciate and praise the good work of others. The nature of human being is that when other people are better off, there can be envy, jealousy, dissatisfaction, and dosa. And the nature of human being is that they don't appreciate or they don't praise the other people's work, but they tend to be destructive. And when dealing with others, there are envy, jealousy. Having practiced meditation, gaining knowledge, one will be able to appreciate other people's good work, and one will be able to appreciate and praise other people's good work. Having metta and karuna towards others, one feels happy to see others who are better off. There will also be mudita, there will also be mudita. The envy, jealousy arises based on dosa. Removing dosa, envy, jealousy is also automatically removed. By becoming a Sotapanna, one removes the gross form of dosa, and thus one removes the gross form of envy and jealousy after having become a Sotapanna. And the sixth is having good reasoning power, good intellectual knowledge that is truthful. So it is very beneficial. Having practiced Satipatthana meditation to a satisfactory level, the mind is developed and knowledge increases and one gains maturity. When one becomes mature, his or her way of thinking becomes high and good, and there will be wholesome thoughts. Whenever one has to do something for one's benefit or for the benefit of others, one should have the reasoning power whether it is beneficial or not. Even though something is beneficial, but if it is not timely, then one should not do it. Only if something is beneficial, if it is timely manner, and if it is suitable, then it should be done. So reasoning power is also very important. However, a person may be well educated, having lots of degrees, having a doctorate, but if the person is lacking moral conduct, it is not easy to do for the benefit of himself, herself, as well as the surrounding, as well as the nation. So Sayadaw will like to encourage the yogis, even though they have to study the worldly education in order to have a good earning and to put it in the worldly way, to use the brain the best one can to study the education. It is important to give priority also to the EQ. So not only the worldly education is important for the living, for earning, but what is more important is the EQ. Daniel Goleman had practiced Satipatthana meditation when the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw taught in the U.S. He, as well as his wife, practices Satipatthana meditation. Also, when other teachers of the Mahasi tradition went to the U.S. to teach. So Daniel Goleman got this understanding because he himself had practiced Satipatthana meditation. So he understood himself, and thus he was able to give such kind of lecture through his research with the foundation of the knowledge he gained from the Satipatthana practice. So may you all be able to practice Satipatthana meditation so that you will have a high SQ. Not only EQ, but to have a high SQ through the Satipatthana practice. That will be all for today.